So I am here to tell you about how I set up this DIY automatic drip tape watering system. This is a 275 gallon IBC tote that collects rainwater from my woodshed, and then I have a pump in here that runs the water through my drip irrigation system, and I have essentially plumbed my whole garden. I have 12 raised beds. If I were to stand out here and manually water, it takes well over an hour, and I'm a busy mom with a day job. I don't have time to stand out here and water each plant at the base. So this system waters for me, so then my time can be better spent looking at my plants, mitigating pests, disease, pulling weeds, because I have to do that constantly. This system saves me hours, and it was a game changer for my garden. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through how I put the system in, materials you're going to need. Everything is going to be listed in the description and linked. I'll also talk about common pitfalls and the struggles I experienced so that you don't have to experience them yourself. So this setup is as close to set and forget as I've been able to get with watering my garden. I usually have the timer set to water daily for an hour, which you can set it at any intervals that you want. You can skip days for rain. My garden actually needs more water than this tote can hold on a regular basis. So I usually manually start my timer and then let it run through its course, and then it shuts off while I'm out here. I don't have to babysit it. I do have to fill this tote with my hose quite a bit because we just don't get enough rain to keep up with my watering needs. As far as materials go, you're going to need your pump, and then you're going to need some form of programmable automatic watering timer. There's a lot of different makes and models of these. I got this one off of Amazon, and I'll put the link in the description, but it doesn't have to be this exact one to work. This isn't a requirement, but I've also purchased this outdoor light timer, but you can use it for other things aside from holiday lights. I've synced this timer with the timer on my pump. This pump would technically constantly have power if it was just plugged into the extension cord. And just as a peace of mind, I want the power to the pump to shut off as soon as it's done watering. And by syncing the timer with my pump or my water timer, that ensures that that happens. Another important thing to note is this pump can run dry. Not every pump can run dry. It would destroy the pump. That's one of the reasons why I chose this pump, just because I want a pump that's going to last me a long time, especially if I can help it. So even though it can run dry, I choose to prevent that from happening just because I want to preserve the life of my pump, and it gets really hot if it runs dry for a really long time, which is also why I've connected it to a timer. The timer just ensures that if this doesn't shut the pump off fully, which sometimes happens, my pump will still half cycle. If I have it hooked up to a timer, the timer cuts off power to the pump after the watering cycle, so it can't keep half cycling. And half cycling can also burn out your pump over time. It doesn't do it often, but every once in a while that happens. So I just figured, why not hook it up to a timer so I don't have to babysit this thing. All right, let's talk materials. Keeping in mind that this is going to vary because everybody's setup is different, and this is specific to my garden and my garden needs. Some of these tools I will tell you you absolutely need, and some of these tools just vary on your setup. The first one is the IBC tote adapter, and this you only need if you're pulling water from your IBC tote. You could use whatever water source you want. You could use a 55-gallon barrel, you could use a whole giant cistern, whatever is at your disposal to use as your water source. But specifically for IBC totes, in order for a regular hose to connect to an IBC tote, this is a 3/4 inch threaded connection, so standard for your garden hose. IBC totes have a huge outlet, so you have to buy one of these. Some IBC totes are threaded, some are not. Mine is not threaded, so it literally just clamps onto my tote. I hook a hose up to it, and it's ready to go. So if you're doing the drip tape component of this, you're gonna need elbows and T's, also depending on your setup. But the way that I ran the plumbing in my garden, I mapped it out on a diagram I made of my garden, and I basically like drew a schematic for where I wanted all my tubing to go. I didn't want it to be in the way on my pathways between my gardens. So once I mapped it out, I was able to calculate how much tubing I needed, how many elbows and T's I needed, how many end caps for the pipe that I needed, and how many end caps for the drip tape I needed. One of the things you're absolutely going to need for this is plumber's tape, or Teflon tape is what they call it. This seals up the threads when you connect two pieces of whatever you're connecting together, because it's very important that your connections don't leak, most specifically and importantly where the outlet is on the water pump to the water timer. So the pump is dependent on the pressure shutting it off. So again, the timer is my valve, and once it wants to start watering, it opens, which tells my pump, go ahead and start pumping. When this closes, the back pressure builds up in here, gets to 45 PSI, and tells my pump to shut off. This is where the plumber's tape really comes into play. There cannot be a leak right here, or the pump will not shut off all the way. This is the most important place where we don't need leaks. This won't hurt anything if it leaks, but I want to prevent as much water loss as possible, so I've sealed everything up. And you don't want water leaking all over your pump. This pump is not weatherproof. I have it in my woodshed, so it's mostly out of the rain, but eventually I'm going to make some kind of housing that will prevent rain from falling on the pump, but it also has to have enough airflow so your pump isn't just in a hot box. Like, that's just not going to be great for it. The pump also comes with a couple little adapters like this, but I just chose to use a 1/2-inch hose, connect it directly to the inlet of my pump, and then I have a brass adapter here that goes from 1/2-inch to 3/4 inch so that my watering timer connects to it, because most all watering timers are going to be 3/4 inch. And then I have a 3/4 inch regular garden hose connected to the bottom of my timer. Let's actually see this thing in action. So I'm going to set my timer so that the pump is on. And then I'm going to set this watering cycle. I don't need it on that long. This is the timer I got. Again, you can use whatever timer, and then my pump should kick on once this timer kicks on. And there you have it. So now if I want the pump to shut off, it shuts off. As soon as this shuts off, it triggers the pump to shut off. It's so freaking nifty. I feel like a mad scientist. I love this. I'm a total nerd about it. You may have just heard my pump half cycle. It does do that. Even though I've got this sealed up so it doesn't leak, it's meant for the faucet on an RV. When you open the faucet, it triggers the pump to start pumping. When you close the faucet, it creates that back pressure, which triggers the pump to shut off. Because this is not necessarily the intended use, it's not 1000% foolproof, but it's pretty close, which is why I have synced it up to this timer, because I want more control. I don't want my pump running or half cycling. So when I set this for an hour, this is also set for an hour, so that when the watering cycle is complete, this shuts off power to my pump. Not necessary, but I like to be extra careful around here. And also, again, this pump is not weatherproof. I highly recommend putting it in something covered, or I'm probably going to take some sort of like off-brand Pelican case and cut it, retrofit it so that it has airflow, but keeps like rain directly off of my pump. Another thing I'm going to do with this pump eventually, when I have time, whenever that is, because I have a day job, is hook this pump up to solar. I think the power requirement is low enough, I haven't looked into it, that I could totally run this off of a solar battery, and then this watering system would almost be entirely off grid. Right now I have it plugged into an extension cord that I have run through my garden. But if like you have this out on some property, I absolutely believe this pump could be run off of solar if you know what you're doing. One day, whenever I get to that, I'll make another video. But for now, we're just plugging it in. All right, I'm gonna give you a little crash course on drip tape, how to connect it, how to set it up. You don't have to use a drip tape system with this pump. You could just use the pump to pump water by whatever means you choose. I chose drip tape because it's efficient. There's basically no water loss. It's not like a big sprinkler system going up in the air. A lot of that water's evaporating. It's hitting your plant's leaves, which a lot of us know. You don't really want to water your plant's leaves. You want to water at the root. So that's why I chose drip tape. It's a really great solution. A lot of people use it, but those were some of my reasons. You're going to need something to cut with. It doesn't have to be crazy. It can be like a decent set of scissors. These are just crappy old shears that I use out in the garden. Drip tape is soft to cut, and so is the tubing that connects it all. You're also going to need the tubing hole punch and the insertion tool. I bought both of these on Amazon. They came together as a kit. I used this more than I used this, mostly because this has a specific use for the types of connectors that I didn't use. But you can use those. There's lots of different ways and configurations you can set this up. It's really based off your preference, your garden layout, your garden needs. The other thing that I purchased, which again, there's so many different options. This is just the one I chose specifically. This is the irrigation tubing connector. So this connects the drip tape to the tube that feeds the water to the drip tape. This is a barbed locking fitting. I chose this just because it made sense to me. Again, there's so many different options. It's a little bit overwhelming. This has worked really well for me, and it was relatively easy to install, although I will warn you, your hands might be sore after you put all this together. So, tubing. Can you even see this? Yes, you can. Okay. So this is the plastic tubing that I used for my drip tape system. This is the standard tubing. It's basically 5/8 diameter tubing. I'm going to save you a lot of struggle that I experienced. For your garden, however you set it up, if you have raised beds, more likely you will need this. But again, this is completely dependent on your garden and what you're trying to accomplish. I had to buy T-connectors and elbow connectors to route this tubing through the raised beds in my garden because it's fairly rigid and you don't want to bend it or it will kink. These connectors are 1/2-inch connectors because when I bought this tubing on Amazon from Drip Depot, the listing specifically says it's 1/2-inch tubing, and that is not correct. There's a lot of reviews on this tubing that say that people basically couldn't use it because it didn't fit all of their connectors, and I've noticed that's quite common on Amazon when you buy this stuff. And that's not to knock Drip Depot. Drip Depot has a lot of amazing supplies for drip irrigation and irrigation systems in general. So I don't want to knock them. They just need to update the wording on their listing on Amazon, which I've put in a review along with a lot of other people. Again, this is standard size 5/8. I specifically purchased 1/2-inch tubing because I had planned to use 1/2-inch tubing when I first got into this. And by the time I got all my materials and actually got out here to start putting it in, I was beyond the return window. I had already started. So I had to make this work with my fittings, which it didn't fit very well. I'll show you. So this is the twisty part, like the locking piece of my fittings. You can barely get it on this tubing. Of course I get it on the first try on video, but it's just very tight. So I actually took a utility knife and shaved this down so it was tapered, which saved me time and pain in my hands because I had a lot of connections. I've got 12 beds. That's a lot of bends. So I had a time with this. If you buy 1/2-inch tubing and 1/2-inch connectors, I've even read reviews on Amazon where people still have trouble with them fitting and being compatible. So just be aware of that. When you're looking for the fittings for your setup on Amazon, read the reviews because people will say in those reviews whether or not these actually were true to size and if they actually worked with the tubing that you purchase. So long story short, match the tubing diameter with the diameter of your fittings, or at least try, because again, the descriptions aren't always accurate or the measurements. A lot of them will list internal diameter and external diameter. Pay attention to that too. The other thing you're gonna need are the end caps for this tubing, because this system has to be sealed up so that it builds up pressure in the lines and the water will only go out the emitters and not like the end of your drip tape or the end of this tubing, or it won't have any pressure built up and it won't work at all. So these, let's see if I can do this again. Let's see if I got lucky. Ooh. So these fit on the ends of your tubing. Ow. This actually really need a screwdriver to put on because it's too tight for me to do the rest of it by hand. But, well, maybe I can. Just sits on the end of these like this. All right, what else? Drip tape. Oh my God. So this is the original drip tape I bought. It's Netafim. It's great drip tape, but the emitters are only a foot apart. I need them to be 6 inches apart for my own specific needs, and that corresponds with plant spacing because you're gonna wanna plant your plants as close to the emitter as possible, because then the water comes out the emitter and goes directly to the roots of your plants, and I plant almost all of my crops closer than 12 inches apart. This works for some people. Again, based on their plant spacing, I needed 6 inches. So I ended up swapping out my drip tape, which actually was really easy. Once you get the whole system installed, it's really easy to connect the drip tape. I'll show you the full connection in a second, but that's how you connect the drip tape to this connector, which goes into the hose that feeds the drip tape water. So I'll show you how all of this connects. You're gonna need your scissors. Obviously cut this to the length that you need it. Again, they don't have to be super sharp because it's really easy to cut. And then you cut your drip tape. So I like to cut the drip tape halfway between emitters. This is my 12-inch. I just fold it in half and match up the emitters on each side. Boop, there you go. So here's your feeder tube. I don't know what else to call it. Here's your hole punch. You kind of have to orient this where you want your hole to be, and then you just, easy as pie. This part, not quite easy as pie. So you're gonna take the barbed end of this, and actually this barb is melted. It came to me that way. They look much better than this. This was just the last one I had. Since this hole's kind of small and this barb is messed up, I'm gonna use this to make the hole a little bit bigger. I don't wanna make it too big because I don't want it to leak. And then I find it's easy. So if you push this in, it's harder to connect these. So I like to kind of squeeze it on the opposite to push it out a little bit. And then you have to shove these together. When you're putting them in, I recommend having these two little arms perpendicular to your pipe. Once you're done, you want to turn it and have them parallel with your pipe because that puts tension on this connector and it just helps prevent water leakage because you don't want to lose water, you don't want to leak. Once you have that connected, make sure this is twisted all the way back. You slide your drip tape on, which can also be a little bit fiddly, especially if it's hot outside. The drip tape gets very soft and then it gets all bendy when you try to slide this on. So I've actually sprayed mine with a hose to cool it off to just make this easier to put on. Once it's connected, you're gonna wanna hold this so it doesn't spin. Oops, which I just failed to do. And then you just twist this until you feel it tight, and then your drip tape is on there. So that's how you connect the drip tape to the tubing that feeds the water to your drip tape. To seal the bottom of your drip tape, which again you have to do because the system has to build up pressure, you fold it once or twice and then you slide this drip tape end piece onto there. And these are meant to be removable because at the end of the season, and this is really important, if you live somewhere where you have hard freezes or even like frost and soft freezes, if there is water left in your system at the end of the season and it freezes, you best believe it's going to bust up all these connectors. The drip tape is fairly resilient, but I just wouldn't chance it, especially after you've put in all the work to install it. So at the end of your season, you take these caps off, not all at the same time, but then you take an air compressor and you blow air through the system, similar to like if you have a sprinkler system in your yard, usually there's a company that you have come out and winterize your system. So you blow air into the system to blow all of the leftover water out of your system, and then that helps prevent things getting cracked over the winter. So I will caution you, if you don't want to have to spend a lot of time maintaining this system, just flush all the water out. Netafim drip tape actually comes with max flushing pressure blurb on it. I won't read it to you, but it tells you, you know, don't use above X amount of pressure or else you could damage your drip tape. And same with the water. You don't want to push water through your drip tape at too high a pressure or it will blow out all of your connections and or screw up your drip tape, which is where the 15 PSI pressure reducer comes into play. You have to have that pressure reducer for this setup to work with that pump because that pump is very strong. So let's also talk about filtration. If you're not using rainwater to feed this system, you don't necessarily need to worry about that. If you are using rainwater or if you plan to put liquid fertilizer into this system, you are going to need a filter. So I have 3 points of filtration. My first point of filtration is I have a mesh guard on top of this gutter, which is what feeds water into my rain catchment system. That helps get any little twigs or leaves or all of the junk that falls off the trees by where I live. That keeps that out of my system. So this is my second point of filtration. This is a mesh sleeve that basically a gutter pipe goes down into. This just catches any little leaves or twigs or seeds that didn't get caught in my mesh gutter guard. My third point of filtration is this Y filter. It has a mesh screen inside that's removable, so you can screw this bottom piece off, take the filter out, clean it out, put it back in. This is standard 3/4 inch hose connection. It's hooked right up to my IBC tote. And then I have an adapter. You don't have to do this. This is just what I chose to do, but I have this adapter that takes it from 3/4 inch to 1/2 inch because this is a 1/2 inch hose that leads to my pump in there. The threading on the pump is 1/2 inch, but you can put an adapter. They're super easy to find to bring it down from 3/4 inch to 1/2 inch, or whatever you end up doing for your system specifically. Here is what I'll call the star of the show, because as I mentioned earlier, this system would not work without this pressure reducer. That pump has a really strong output. We need to limit that. This limits it to 15, which means it doesn't blow out the connectors, it doesn't blow out the drip tape itself. And I got this on Amazon. I'll put the link in the description. I did use the plumber's tape to prevent leakage. Even though this stuff is threaded, it still gets a little bit leaky. So plumber's tape, again, is going to be your best friend in this process. This is the outlet line of my pump. It connects to my tubing, which connects all of my garden beds together. I've got my elbows in here. This line connects to all my drip tape. So every one of my beds has the tubing and then 4 rows of drip tape. Show you my end caps. Here's where these end caps come into play, because this is the end of the system. And that is my setup. I've got it all routed through my garden, and I've got it up against my beds so that it's not easy to trip on. And eventually I'll have gravel paths, so this tubing will actually be covered up by gravel and you won't see it. But it's going to be a while before I have that. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. I'm happy to talk about this stuff, and good luck if you decide to do your own automatic watering system. It's amazing. You will love it, and you're going to thank yourself later.